What About Vietnam? A podcast with Carrie Newsom. The series where Carrie talks with travellers about their experiences and adventures. Find out more about Vietnam from the people who have actually been there.
What about Vietnam?
Whether it's adventure, exploring the culture and cuisine, shopping, or just soaking up the sun. Let Carrie and her travellers pave the way for a magical holiday in Vietnam.
What about Vietnam?
Xin chào and welcome to What About Vietnam. Today I'm delighted to have Kerstin Pilz on the show because we're going to discuss how journaling or writing can help you explore the reasons why you want to go to Vietnam. Together we take a real deep dive into how to capture that pre-trip excitement and anticipation, as none of us know when we will be travelling abroad again. We are all looking for ways to do that, I think. Does that explain the boom in travel groups on social media as we all want to keep our dreams alive and chat about where we want to go after COVID? Can a journal tease out those begging questions of why, how, when, and if? And can it be our companion pre the trip, during the trip, and post the trip? Let's find out. Kerstin, in her recent TEDx talk, spoke about the healing power of writing as a way to heal and grow. In the context of travel, in this episode, we talk about how a journal can, from the very beginning, help tease out any fears you may have, expectations, and of course it helps you document that bucket list of things to see and do. We discuss how writing can be the companion to your experience and help you overcome those feelings that right now you just can't explain, especially as we venture out after the COVID pandemic. Kerstin tells us about her writing retreats in Hoi An and how many solo women travellers join. They come to connect with other travellers and to give themselves the permission to possibly deal with old feelings that they haven't had a chance to express in a creative way. Let's face it, writing for yourself is a dialogue with yourself. Essentially, you become the author of your own experiences and your own holiday. Dr. Kerstin Pilz, as she is also known, is a published author, former academic with almost 20 years' experience as a teacher, and a wellbeing coach who runs her own online business and writing retreats in Australia and Hoi An. Kerstin moved to Hoi An in 2016 and set up a popular online business, writeyourjourney.com, that allows her to share the tools that helped her transform, grow and heal. Thanks to the pandemic, she is currently in Australia and finishing her memoir, Falling Apart Gracefully. You'll get a real sense for how her and I both feel about travel in Vietnam. And in this episode, we share just how we've used writing, journaling, and creating trip books to capture our experiences. Please welcome Kerstin to the program. Kerstin, hello and welcome to What About Vietnam?
Thank you, Carrie, for having me on your show.
Look, I'm really excited about this episode, so let's jump right in as we've got a lot to talk about. I thought let's do this a little bit differently this time. Kerstin, let's just pretend we're taking a leisurely walk together and we're just chatting, and I begin our conversation by saying, look, once we're allowed to travel, I would really like to go to Vietnam. I'm seeing it come up quite a lot in the media. It seems to have had and been faring really well through the COVID crisis, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Would I like it? Would I feel safe? Is it really my kind of destination? I don't know, a lot about it. I mean, what do you think? How do you think I can kind of process should I, shouldn't I, that kind of thing about whether to go to Vietnam?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carrie. Thank you for that. As you know, I teach writing, personal writing and journaling. And I think a travel journal can begin way before the trip itself. And as we all know, right now, the idea, even just you and I strolling around Sydney, is almost unthinkable. So the idea even to go overseas, it really makes everybody quite nervous. And so the journal is really an opportunity to actually get in touch with those feelings, with our fears, and maybe also with our reasons for actually going on a journey. Because any trip, whether we're going to a very safe place or whether we're going to a really far-flung place like I did last year, I went to Iran, or not last year, the year before, takes us outside of our comfort zones. And so that is where the journal comes in handy, because any trip is inevitably a form of inner journey as well. And that inner journey begins a long time before you're standing there at the airport with your mask and perhaps trembling knees. So that is...
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Mm. So where do you begin with a journal like that? Does it start with research, do you think? Or, like you're talking about that inner journey. I don't know where to start. Why do I want to go to Vietnam of all places? Like, crazy?
Yes, I mean, obviously there would be, objective sort of reasons, like it was just in a statistic named as the second best country having dealt with COVID just after New Zealand. So it's obviously one of the safer countries to go to. I personally have been a solo traveler for much of my life, and I would say Vietnam is one of the safest countries. The journal really, you can use it obviously for the sort of nitty-gritty trip planning. Of course, there are apps around that you could use, but it's also really nice to use a pen and paper journal and to write down your itinerary. And the thing is, we're all at the moment dreaming about going on a trip, because nobody knows when we can even go. The borders can close, even state borders, any minute. So just use the journal as a way of savoring, of prolonging the sort of pre-trip excitement. I recently did a very interesting course with Yale University about happiness. And the interesting thing that these researchers found was that we experience happiness by savoring the moment. And that means the anticipation of the experience. And so there is, for example, a really good place for the journal to actually prolong this experience by writing about your pre-trip excitement and sort of teasing out the reasons for why you've chosen this country. It might be economical, it's just cheaper, or it might be because it's different to other places. So, yeah.
And I think that cultural expectation is also an element. I know years and years ago when I did anticipate going to Vietnam, you made me think. I did start to write down things that I wanted, to get some verification on, because, coming from Australia, there was lots of talk about the Vietnam War. Did the Vietnamese like Australians? Did they, how did they feel about us as a country? So I had lots of notes and questions that I want answered during my visit. What do you think? What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that you bring up there. And it sort of, hones in on the idea of our expectations, because inevitably we always look at a foreign culture through the lens of our own expectations and our cultural understanding and the ways we behave. So I think a journal can be very helpful in that, because also we get surprised in our trips, positively and negatively. And the journal is actually a way to then reframe your experiences, especially the negative ones, and to really see and dig deep. And I think it's really interesting that you brought up that historical question. How would I feel as an Australian passport holder going to Vietnam? Would they look at me like strangely or hostile? And let me assure your listeners that is actually not the case at all. I always...
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So, and I'm always surprised.
But I did come...
Yeah, go on, Carrie.
Yes. Yes, yeah. I think having some understanding. I know I read a few books at the time to get a better understanding of that, especially when I was visiting certain places in Vietnam that held a lot of I guess, historical significance in respect to that. I looked at them, as you say, through that lens, but I did refer back to, for want of a better word, my trip book or my trip planning book. And I kind of had a list of to-dos and some things that I just wanted to experience, to say, gosh, this happened then, and how it transpired, and then to see it now and to be greeted by the lovely people in Vietnam was just such a welcoming feeling, so that when I came back and people asked me again, I could refer, oh yes, I actually went to that site, and this is what I experienced. And places like the Coochie tunnels and things like that, I think speak to a lot of historical significance. And I think they do resonate with your upbringing, with your emotions, your feelings, and how our forefathers, I guess, could have experienced Vietnam very differently.
Yes, I mean, it was interesting. The very first time I went to Vietnam, I went with a friend in 2004. And I grew up in Germany, and my father grew up in East Germany, so communist Germany. And I had this communist flash. I had this nostalgia in Hanoi. I couldn't get, over the similarities. And I sort of felt very unexpectedly sort of a connection, even though I grew up in West Germany. I still felt this connection between, part of the Germany where my father grew up and Hanoi with the communist paraphernalia and all of that, which really, really surprised me. And I had to actually go to my journal to tease that out, because my friend that I was traveling with, she couldn't really understand. She kept laughing at me. So that's the other thing that that's the other thing that the journal, where the journal comes in handy. It is also a companion, whether you travel alone or not, because obviously when you travel alone, it is a very handy companion. But also when you travel with a friend, because often you do get very different, reactions to places. And also you may know your friend here in Australia or wherever you come from, and you have that familiarity. But once you both step out of that comfort zone, you might react to that other culture in a very different way. You might feel challenged in very, very different ways. I had this experience with my friend. She's a very much an extrovert, and I'm much more an introvert. And so I actually liked the fact that I could lean on my journal and just have that quiet time to process and say, can you just give me a moment? I just need to write down what we saw and did today. And that's another, aspect of the journal that a lot of travelers will find useful.
Yeah. So what you're saying, and I mean, I kind of hold you up there in the writing journaling sphere, and certainly connected to travel. And your recent TED talk spoke a lot about the healing power of writing. So if we're talking to my audience and saying, okay, the writing aspect can actually begin well before you leave. It can become part of your, I guess, inner exploration and research technique to decide, whether or not you do want to go to Vietnam. I mean, I'm hoping even my podcasts are part of a person's process of research and understanding the country, because, we're talking to people like yourself who have been to Vietnam, lived in Vietnam, and travelled extensively. So you've got a lot to share. So if I was to kind of point at some beginnings of that writing journal, that we're starting at the very beginning of the process, what about if we touched on some of the things that you would advise people to include in that journal? Like we mentioned things like stepping out of their comfort zone. You know, What advice would you give to a person to start the journal? How could they kind of begin? Do they write a list of, things I'm worried about, like number one, the food or the
Mhm.
traffic, or I don't
Mhm.
know. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, sure. So first of all, my expertise, like you just said there in my TED talk, it was the healing power of writing, and that sort of goes hand in hand with that idea of the inner journey, because as we said at the beginning, any trip is a step outside of the comfort zone, and it's really confronting. And again, especially during these times in COVID, when everything is so uncertain. And so the lists is actually a very, very good way to journal. I often use that in my writing groups as a writing prompt. Write a list of the fears you may have, or write a list of the preconceived ideas you may hold towards that country, and really be honest with yourself. And that's the other beautiful thing about a journal. It is a place where you're meant to be brutally honest, because it's only for yourself. And that's also the sort of fabulous thing in a way about a journal. It is a dialogue with yourself, and you can be frank, So lists is a very good place. And you could list, my favorite top things I want to see, my Vietnam bucket list. That could be a list. And then you could go off and do your research, the things I definitely want to do and achieve in this trip. Or maybe a list about, what do I want to get out of this trip? Do I want to go for relaxation, cultural, awareness, and deepening my cultural awareness of this country, or maybe a mixture of both? So the lists can be themed, my fears. And I think that's the other thing. We often, because we do live in a culture of positivity and so on, we often don't give ourselves permission to actually think about our fears. And travel inevitably brings up a lot of fears. So give yourself permission to write about those fears. And then go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to maybe be cheeky enough to ask, when you did visit Vietnam for the first time back in 2004, did you have a list of things that you wanted to experience, or fears that you might have had, preconceived ideas, anything like that? What was on your list?
Well, you know what? This is actually quite embarrassing to confess, but I actually I was quite overworked at the time, and I just needed a break. And my friend said, "Let's go to Vietnam," and I was so silly. I hadn't even brought a Lonely Planet or any. We hadn't actually planned anything. We were on the plane, and because I hadn't seen my friend in a while, so sometimes how it is, you catch up with a friend as you go on a holiday. We were just chatting, and then we touched down in I think it was Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, and we're like, actually, hang on, where are we meant to stay tonight? I mean, so I wouldn't advise that. I don't travel like that anymore. I'm also a little bit older now. I don't have I get a little bit more anxious these days. So I usually have the first flight booked. And so, here we are standing at the taxi rank going, hang on, where's the backpacker quarter? Where does one go? So, yes, I would definitely advise doing that research in advance, and also doing the research on, like, I don't know, how much is a taxi meant to cost? And, how do I get from the airport to town without feeling ripped off? Because you don't want to start your journey in a negative way, feeling, oh my God, that taxi driver just ripped me off. So, and it actually won't happen in Vietnam, because it's so organized there. So they'll have yeah. Yes. So
I think when you're younger, you do kind of fly by the seat of your pants in a way, and that's totally cool. But I think as you do get older, you become a little bit more of a thoughtful traveler, do you think?
Yes, and also it depends how much time you have. Like, back in the day when I had, I don't know, months and months of backpacking, and you just go where the wind blows you, that's cool. That's part of that experience. But if you're working and your annual leave is very minimal in Australia, we typically get 20 days. That is not very much to play with. So that's where, again, the journal comes in really handy, and the trip planning, because you really want to figure out, okay, do I need one night in this place? Do I should give myself 3 nights here? Do I want a rest stop in the middle of the trip? Because, often when we cram too much into our journeys, we can come home feeling more exhausted than before we left. So definitely,
Absolutely.
I would advise, or I these days plan a little bit more carefully. Although I didn't do that on my last trip to Iran. Again, we just had the first night booked, but that was because there was very little information available. Vietnam has a lot of information, and your wonderful podcast is, of course, one of them. So I would advise do immerse yourself, and especially because we don't know when we'll travel. So use this time to do a little bit of armchair travel, and use the time to write about and start that dialogue with yourself. What do I want to get out of this trip? And how do I expect it to change me? And what are my fears, like we said before? And what are my preferences, especially if you're traveling with other people? They can often be a clash. One person wants to be super active. The other one maybe wants to hang more by the pool. So how do you negotiate that, and so on?
Yes, and I think that's something definitely to consider when you are traveling, either as a family or, as you say, with a friend, or even in a group. Sometimes there'll be a dynamic in that group where one person's a big doing person, or group, and the other person's a bit more of a chill kind of aspect. Just on the writing side of it, you've got me thinking now about journaling, and I'm a bit of a fan of pen and paper, and beautiful little kind of notebooks, and that's probably very old fashioned. But about capturing those highlights, I tend to take lots of photos, and I have created over my life various like trip albums, so that everything from the first itinerary to the ticket to hotel bills to tickets to shows, things like that, I include all in a trip album so that I can go back and say, gosh, I went to Vietnam back in 2010, and, I was only paying, so many dong for a hotel. And now, 10 years on, I'm paying this in a hotel, or, the sophistication has increased. And I certainly think both you and I have both seen Vietnam evolve and become a much more sophisticated country, and able to deal with the Western traveller in a much more, how shall I say, luxurious way than it had. And I mean, what are your thoughts about trip books versus trip apps versus photos?
Yes.
This is your space. So tell me more about your thoughts on that. Am I just sort of like, in the hillbilly crowd, like?
No, I
not?
think you're spot on, Carrie, and thank you for that question. I am quite active on Instagram because I love taking photos, but like all of us, you can take 100 photos and then, you go back to work and suddenly you forget about them. And one day you need to change phone and you go, oh my God, I haven't even downloaded those photos or done anything with them. And the same can be true for a camera. I mean, I used to travel with a big camera. So I really like the old-fashioned journal for several reasons. One is what you just mentioned. You use it like a scrapbook, and it becomes sort of this lively record. And I think years down the track, you'll treasure that more than the photos that you never downloaded from your iPhone or your camera. Because, like you said, you can stick, receipts, entrance tickets from the temple or the pagoda in there, and it becomes sort of a visual record, a scrapbook. And the other thing is a journal slows you down. And one of the reasons we take trips is to actually get away from our everyday life. Often we feel a bit burnout with our jobs, our routines. So traveling is a way to slow down, and writing by pen and paper is a way to slow down and to really get in touch with your deepest thoughts and reactions. So I really am a great advocate of get yourself a beautiful journal, with a nice sturdy cover, or you might even buy it there if you, that's another
Yes,
lovely,
there's some beautiful paper that you can buy in Vietnam for sure, and books.
Yeah.
with handmade paper and lovely, lovely. Yes.
Mm. And the other thing is, of course, I find people, suddenly discover their creativity when they write. I get so many people in my online courses who feel very, very shy to admit to themselves that they have creative stirrings, but we all have them, but they get sort of taught out of us when we grow up. We leave the crayons in the sandbox in the kindergarten and then we grow up. But journaling is a very lovely way to get in touch again with your creativity and discover things about yourself that you didn't even know you had in yourself. And so savor that time, and I think it's a wonderful tool to document your trip. It's a practical way to stay organized. And of course, there's 100 apps out there to use, but I personally don't actually use them. I just use Instagram because I like it and it helps me connect with my community. But I actually love the journal. Yeah.
Absolutely. So now, what do you think it is about Vietnam that does seem to inspire the writer in us? I know on one of my trips, I had the privilege to attend one of your writing classes, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I think retreats or writing retreats is a kind of a unique thing in itself. But there's something about Vietnam that you mentioned slows you down, or there's something about the nature of Vietnam in some places, like Hoi An, where you held your writing retreats. Tell us a little bit about a writing retreat and what people can expect to experience in that.
Yeah, great question, Carrie. And also, I just wanted to say that class you came to was the very, very first class I ever held. So you're part of history there.
Good to know.
Yeah, I was very nervous that day, but that was 4 years ago. We actually turned 4, our writers group, and this year we had to do it via Zoom. So in the writers, you mentioned I listened to some episodes of your wonderful podcast, and you have talked about yoga retreats and skin wellness retreats. So you can obviously do a range of retreats, and Vietnam is still a virgin territory, if you like, and as was discussed in some of your episodes there when it comes to retreats. So a writing holiday is quite a unique way to experience a holiday. Typically, I get a lot of women, but that's just because I sort of advertise that way. And often they come because they may want to travel by themselves, but they feel a little bit uncomfortable to just go all by themselves. So retreat gives them that container of safety and community. And I also often get people who not necessarily are aspiring to publish books or to write creative fiction. Most of the people who come to my retreats are actually there to connect with themselves. So they use that like other people might go on a yoga or meditation retreat. And we actually combine yoga and meditation and mindfulness with the writing practice. And so they really come to take that deep dive into themselves and to dwell on that dialogue with themselves. Often they work through episodes in their lives that may have been traumatic or difficult. And so they want to find that sort of next chapter, because really writing symbolically is all about closing one chapter and opening another one. And that is why also I love that trip book. You open it and it's a blank page and you can put into it whatever you want. It really is up to you. You're the author of your trip and also of your life. And the other thing, of course, about Vietnam is that because it's not sort of so oversaturated, it's not Bali from an Australian perspective. There's a lot of travel historically that has gone into Bali. It's sort of still more new and fresh. A lot of people love that sort of, or what I do with my students on retreat or my participants is we go to the markets, we do cooking classes. So I also take them on excursions and then we write about it. What did you see today that really surprised you? Or describe, I don't know, the smile on the lips of a vendor, that you didn't have a common language with at the market, but you still had a really profound experience connecting with that person. Describe that. Describe the feeling of riding through the rice paddies. What did you see? And that is another way of slowing down and, connecting with your senses. And again, connecting with yourself in ways you don't normally do when you're following your routine. You're going through life on autopilot, just busy getting through the day. So it's a really lovely way to expanding yourself, your understanding, and you're opening yourself up to the world in creative ways. Yeah.
And it's a lovely way to record your actual experience at the time, because sometimes, we are so busy, we're getting on the cable car, we're going up, with the kids to the top of the mountain to Barney Hills and whatever. And just to make sure at the end of the day, we captured something that someone said, or as you say, the smile on the girl's face as she said, welcome to Barney Hills, or, we very rarely give ourselves the privilege of that because busyness gets in the way. I know one of the things that I've written about in Vietnam quite a bit is, in particular in Hoi An, is the colours. I'm always struck by the colour and how the colour and the colours I experience influence me and my sense of happiness, my sense of joy, my sense of well-being, my positivity levels. I always come away from Hoi An feeling very lighter, brighter, more colourful, more creative, more open, more even friendly. I think I'm even a nicer person.
Yeah, I think that totally resonates with me because, as you know, I lived in Hoi An up until I became stranded here, actually almost a year ago now. And you made me really nostalgic there, of course. There's a beautiful, yeah. And the beautiful thing about the Vietnamese is the smiles, even though I often think, my God, these people have gone through incredible hardship, inconceivable trauma, and yet they're smiling and they're resilient and they live in the moment. And again, writing is actually about capturing the experience in the moment, documenting the story as it is unfolding. And so there's a point of connection there when we slow down and slow down to that very moment where I feel I can connect better with the locals because they live in the here and now. It's not about the past, even though that past could, weigh terribly on their minds. And I'm sure it does. But, it is about living now and expressing that joy and that happiness. And one thing I was just thinking then is I do with my community is to encourage them to write a gratitude journal. And that's something you can also do with your journal when you travel, because like you say, we are so busy sometimes, we go up, and I remember meeting somebody who said, so today I have to just get the tailor done, and then I have to get this done, and then I still have to go to there. And why do you have to do that? You're on a holiday. You don't actually have to go to the tailor. You could just relax, So one way to capture what you have actually experienced is to write a gratitude journal. 5 things I saw today that made me smile. You could do that every day, but especially on a trip, it's just such a beautiful record to take home. And then even on the days when you're not feeling so happy and you're anxiously awaiting your next holiday, you might just go over that and say, oh my God, that was so simple. And it was so profound and so wonderful. So yeah, it's the simple things that often we take.
And I think, when someone then asks you down the track, gosh, why do you keep going to Vietnam? What is it about Vietnam? Even if I've momentarily forgotten, which doesn't happen very often, as you know, but if I momentarily think, why do I go, or why did I go to that place? What was it about Barbie Lake that I fell in love with it? Was it the stillness? Was it, the serene environment? Was it the beautiful, warm family that I stayed with, at a homestay? Was it, that really beautiful meal that I had with them when it was cold and, we were all rugged up and we really couldn't converse because obviously my Vietnamese is hopeless. However, we did have a connection through our smiling with each other, with our handshakes, with our gestures and things like that. How can I convey that? This is one of the things that I guess has spurred me on with my podcasting, and I think from what I know about you has spurred you on with your writing classes and your retreats in Hoi An and things like that, because it comes out in what you deliver and what you give and what you invest into those retreats. I want to finish, Kirstin, because we are getting away with time. We did kind of touch on, why Vietnam, why go to Vietnam and not Bali? Now, I have, my answers to that. What would be your answer to that? Why Vietnam? Why not Bali? Because we've both been to both places.
Yes, I actually lived in Bali for a year in 1986, believe it or not, when it was very different. So my reason for not going to Bali, I guess it's because I'm nostalgic for the Bali that no longer is. But it's also, I guess, has that reputation, I guess, people go there for parties and it's very crowded. I actually recently did go to Bali. Just before I came back to Australia, I transited via Bali and I spent a week there. And it was just so busy and it sort of had lost a lot of its charm. And I just... Yeah, so commercialized. I mean, obviously any country in Hoi An especially is booming, or it was booming before COVID. There also you watched, the rice paddies disappearing and so on. But I feel there's a creative energy in Vietnam, especially with the young people. It has a very large young population, and maybe because it had communist oppression and the war before that for a long time, there is sort of an opening up, a burgeoning creative energy that you often experience in countries that awaken to something new. You had it so I feel there is, a creative spirit and adventurousness that is perhaps was in Bali years ago and is no longer there for me anyway. With the young people opening beautifully hipster, coffee bars with, there's those decorations, the tiles. And suddenly I remember one reason why I nearly did not move to Hoi An was in 2016, which is not so long ago, because it didn't have a yoga center. It was that year that Natalie, whom you know, opened the first yoga center in Hoi An, Nomad Yoga. And up until then, it didn't have a yoga center. And so everything was still new, virgin territory, Ubud is saturated now with yoga centers, and especially after that book by Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love. But Hoi An is still, or Vietnam is still sort of, virgin territory in many respects. And that's what I love. There's a freshness and a newness there.
There is. Kirstin, look, it's been lovely having you on the program. I hope we together have inspired people to have a look at the option when they are investigating a trip to Vietnam, to look at the idea of starting even before, that armchair version of research and that armchair version of an inner journey, as you say. And I'll definitely be putting, the links to your retreats, both in Hoi An and at Mission Beaches, which is where you're sitting at the moment.
Correct.
Just lovely to have you on the program as always, and lovely to catch up with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you made me a little bit nostalgic now. But just to leave your listeners with this, do not be afraid. Vietnam is a wonderful place and it's safe.
Thank you for listening. Check out the episode notes for more information.
What about Vietnam?
Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review, and stay tuned for more fun adventures in Vietnam.
What about Vietnam?